This video is 10 common mistakes that people make when pumping their wheels or replacing their tires and inner tubes. Number 10 is when people are replacing the inner tubes on wheels that have spokes, they neglect to check the rubber band that runs along the inside of the rim. Underneath this rubber band are the ends of the spokes, and these are sharp. And if this rubber band breaks or has gone missing as you've been removing the tire and you don't check that it's in order and is covering all the ends of the spokes, you can very easily pump up a new inner tube inside a wheel like this, and the inner tube will immediately puncture as it comes into contact with sharp ends on the ends of these spokes. Mistake number 9 is using pliers in order to reposition the nozzle of the inner tube after you have put it in the wheel, using pliers in general on the nozzle of an inner tube. Most of the time people do this in order to get at the nozzle so that it can be pumped easier, or to get it to look more straight after already applying the new inner tube or tire. What happens when you use pliers is you damage the threading on the outside, as well as squeezing too tight very often and damaging the circularness or symmetry of the nozzle itself. This means that next time you want to pump up the wheel, your pump will no longer fit onto the end of the nozzle or will not be able to push air into the inner tube. Number 8 is using sharp tools to pull the tire off of the rim of wheels when you intend to replace the tire but not to replace the inner tube. If you use things like a flat-headed screwdriver, which is a bit sharp and edged, in order to pull the tire up off the rim, you do damage poking, ripping, puncturing the inner tube inside, even if you have released most or all of the air out of it. If you buy a patching kit for inner tubes, these usually come with small plastic tools designed for helping you to pull the tire off the rim. However, in my experience, these are intended more for bicycles, which have a shallower edge to the rim and are a bit difficult to use on stroller wheels. They tend to bend, and it is harder to pull the tire up over the rim. What you need then, ideally, is something that is metal but is rounded. Very often the end of a spoon will work well. Just check and see if you have a spoon or something like this which is rounded and smooth without sharp ends. This will work perfectly fine then for pulling the tire up off of the rim and will not damage the inner tube inside. Number 7, knowing that your tire has been punctured most likely by a sharp object, but failing to check the tire and see if the sharp object still remains inside it. Very often small nails or small pieces of glass can actually become embedded in the outside rubber of the tire, and if you don't check it, at least by, when you take the tire off, running your hands along the inside and examining a bit of the outside to make sure that the object is not there. Then when you inflate a new inner tube inside and it pushes up and expands against the tire, it will simply become punctured again. Number 6 is not checking that your tire is evenly spaced around the rim when you start to pump it up and as you go through the pumping process. We've made several videos on how to properly inflate a wheel, and this is a point that we always focus on a little bit. When you look at a tire, it has this inner plastic ring on it, and the purpose of that is to help you to position the tire around the edge of the rim in an even manner. If you begin to pump your wheel and then leave a little bit of air out so that you can still kind of pull the tire around, pull and push to get that rim equal all around, then pump a little more, again try to adjust, and do this 2 or 3 times during the pumping process, then you can get the tire very evenly spaced around the rim. If you don't do this, you can wind up with a wheel that looks as though it limps as it goes, because one side simply sticks out more, and thus the stroller will always feel as if it's going over rolling hills. Number 5 is making sure that the inner tube does not become twisted or pinched against the rim, between the rim and the tire, when you're putting a new inner tube in a tire or in a wheel. So when you're putting the new inner tube in, you want to make sure that while you're pushing it in under the lip of the tire, it does not become twisted someplace. This will cause it to pinch, and you'll get a deformity in the way it looks when it's fully inflated. It can also lead to puncture. The second part of this then is making sure that as you are putting the tire back on the rim, or the second side of the tire back on the rim, that the inner tube does not become pinched between the tire and the rim, as this will also create a puncture once you start to inflate the wheel and put pressure on it. What I mean by this is as you are putting the tire over, you need to make sure the inner tube is not sticking over the edge so that the traction created as you pull this over doesn't pull on the thin rubber here and thus rip the inner tube. Number 4 is replacing the inner tubes in a wheel in which the tire obviously needs to be replaced as well. When you get a tire that punctures, it's important to look over the tire, make sure that it has not started to split along the ridge, make sure that there are not obvious holes going on in the tire. Make sure that it's not cracked. You'll very often see that within the pattern on the tire. Make sure that it's not too bald, or you may risk simply putting a new inner tube in a wheel that's going to puncture again within a number of days or weeks. Number 3, overly inflating your wheels, often as a result of following max PSI indicators on the tire itself. Here it says max inflate to 35 PSI. That means that's the absolute max you can pump this wheel to until it explodes. It does not mean it is the ideal pressure for the wheel. You'll probably find the ideal pressure for the wheel about halfway to 35 PSI. When you want to know whether your wheel is fully inflated, it should feel hard with just the slightest amount of give. This is my experience for this. However, trying to pump wheels up to 35 when it says 35, I have noticed will cause all kinds of damage to the tires, bulging, damage to the rims, and potentially explosive situations. Number 2, pumping your wheel when your wheel is attached to your stroller and your stroller is upright. This is related to number 6, which has to do with even tire spacing around the rim, but this is the most common cause of that problem. So when your wheel is on the stroller, gravity is pushing down on the wheel as it pushes down on the stroller and thus forcing the tire upwards. If you then just pump your wheel without turning your stroller on the side and making sure that the tire is evenly spaced, you will wind up with a situation where the wheel is pumped such that the tire pops too much up at the top and thus creates a humping sort of effect, a limping effect as you drive your stroller. And the number 1 common mistake that people make while pumping their stroller wheels is to pump them at a gas station using an air compressor designed to deal with the load of a car tire. When you do this, the air rushes in very fast and a lot of air, and can damage the rims, can damage the tires, and can potentially damage you as well. So when you're pumping the wheels of any sort of stroller, you want to use a hand pump, you want to use a foot pump, something mechanical, or if you're going to use an air compressor, you want to use a home air compressor, something that is very easy to gauge how much air you're putting in the wheel and to stop it ahead of any sort of explosive results. So that was our 10 most common mistakes that people make while pumping their stroller wheels or changing their tires and inner tubes. We hope that this video has been interesting to you. If it has been, we ask you subscribe as it helps us continue making videos in the future. Thank you.